The fluorescent lights hummed, a sickly yellow glow against the stark white walls. I blinked, my eyes gritty, and tried to remember how I'd ended up in this room. The door was solid, no handle on my side. A small barred window offered a sliver of sky, but it was too high to see anything beyond a vague, hazy blue. This wasn't home. This wasn't even a hospital. Before continuing, please share your location in the comments below. My name is Lillian. I'm 29 years old, or at least I was a few days ago. The last thing I remembered was a dull ache behind my eyes, a glass of water my mother, Amelia, had given me, and then nothing. Now, here I was in what the nurses cheerfully called a wellness facility, but felt more like a very polite prison. Good morning, Lillian. How are we feeling today? A woman in scrubs, her name tag reading Brenda, smiled at me from the doorway, which she had opened with a keycard. Confused and angry, I said, my voice raspy. Why am I here? I need to leave. Brenda's smile didn't waver. We understand you're feeling disoriented. Dr. Evans will be in to speak with you shortly. Just try to relax. She placed a small paper cup of pills on my bedside table, along with a glass of water, and left, the door clicking shut behind her. Relax? The word felt like a slap. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments. The night before everything went black, I'd been at my mother's house. She'd been unusually quiet, watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. You look tired, sweetie, Amelia had said, her voice soft, almost too soft. She was 54 but carried herself with the rigid posture of someone much younger, always perfectly coiffed, her eyes missing the warmth that usually accompanied her words. Why don't you stay the night? We can catch up. I'd hesitated. My mother and I had always had a complicated relationship. She was controlling, always had been, but usually it manifested in unsolicited advice about my career or my dating life, not this unsettling quiet. Still, I was tired. Okay, just for tonight, I'd agreed, rubbing my temples. She'd brought me a glass of water, telling me it would help with the headache. It tasted faintly metallic. That was it. The last clear memory. The next thing I knew, I was here, waking up to the sterile smell of disinfectant and the distant, muffled sounds of other patients. Dr. Evans, a man with kind eyes but a dismissive air, came in later. He listened patiently as I explained, logically, that I was fine, that this was a mistake. He nodded, scribbled notes, and then said, Lillian, your family is very concerned about you. They've described some concerning behaviors. We just want to make sure you're safe. Concerning behaviors. What behaviors? I demanded, my voice rising. I'm a 29-year-old woman with a job, an apartment, a life. This is insane. He just smiled gently. We understand this is frustrating, but sometimes when we're unwell, it's hard to see it ourselves. 2 days passed like that. 48 hours of polite gaslighting, of being told I was confused when I was crystal clear, of being fed medications I refused to take, only for them to magically appear in my water or food. My frustration simmered, turning into a cold, hard knot of dread. Why would my family do this? Why, Amelia? And Hank, my older brother 31, always so eager to please her, always so resentful of me. Had he been involved? On the second night, a different nurse, a younger woman named Sarah, came in to check on me. Her eyes held a flicker of something, not pity, but understanding. As she adjusted my blanket, her hand brushed mine, and she slipped something into my palm. A phone. An old burner phone. "You have 5 minutes," she whispered, her gaze fixed on the door. "No calls to family. They're monitoring everything." My heart hammered. I scrolled through the contacts, finding nothing. Then I remembered. My car. I had been planning to sell it, had even listed it online a few weeks ago. I quickly typed in the number for the online marketplace. A man answered. "Hello, you've reached Automart. How can I help you?" "Hi, I'm calling about a listing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A silver Honda Civic, license plate 7XQ. "Ah, yes, the Civic. That one sold this morning. Quick sale, actually. The owner was very eager to offload it." My breath hitched. "The owner? Who was the owner?" Let me see. The account was under a Henry Sherman. Said he was selling it on behalf of his sister, who was going through some things." Henry. Hank. My brother. He'd sold my car. My car, which was parked in my apartment building's garage. My apartment. My phone. My bank accounts. The pieces clicked into place, cold and sharp. This wasn't about my wellness. This was about something else entirely. Something stolen, fury, pure and unadulterated, surged through me, burning away the confusion and the dread. They hadn't just put me here. They were systematically dismantling my life. I handed the phone back to Sarah, my hands trembling. She gave me a small, sad nod. Later that night, as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, a folded piece of paper slid under my door. I snatched it up, my heart pounding. It was from the patient in the room next door, a quiet woman I'd only seen briefly in the hallway. The note was scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Your family called this in 2 weeks before you snapped." The nurse, Brenda, handed me a crumpled paper bag containing the clothes I'd worn 3 days ago. They felt alien, stiff with the memory of that last night. "You're all set, Lillian," she said, her voice devoid of the forced cheerfulness. "Your family has been informed of your release." I nodded, my stomach churning. They had been informed, but they weren't here. No Amelia, no Hank. Just the sterile lobby of the facility and the cold, indifferent world outside. I walked out into the crisp autumn air, the kind that usually invigorated me, but now just felt like a slap. My car, the silver Honda Civic Hank had sold, was gone. My phone, which had been confiscated, wasn't returned. I had a few crumpled dollars in my pocket, enough for a bus ticket. The ride felt endless, each stop a reminder of how far I was from my life, from everything I'd taken for granted. When I finally got off, the familiar street to my apartment building looked the same, but I felt like a ghost walking through it. The key slid into the lock. A small victory. But the moment I pushed the door open, my breath hitched. The apartment was empty. Not just tidy, but gutted. The furniture was gone. My books, my art, even the framed photos on the walls. All gone. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight, illuminating a vast, echoing space where my life used to be. My phone, my lifeline, was useless. I tried calling my provider from a payphone I found a few blocks away. "Account suspended," the automated voice chirped. "Please contact customer service for more details." I knew what that meant. They'd cut me off. Next, the bank. I walked to the nearest branch, my heart thudding against my ribs. The teller, A young woman with kind eyes looked at me with pity. "I'm sorry, Miss Sherman," she said, her voice hushed. "Your accounts have been frozen. There's a legal hold. You'll need to speak with your family's attorney." My family's attorney! The words tasted like ash. My mother and Hank weren't just trying to help me. They were systematically erasing me. I needed a computer. Desperate, I found a public library. The librarian eyed my disheveled appearance, but didn't say anything as I signed up for a guest pass. I sat down at a dusty terminal, my fingers trembling as I typed. First, my email. My primary account was locked, password changed, but I had an old, rarely used Gmail account, a relic from college. Miraculously, it worked. I scrolled through years of spam and forgotten newsletters, searching for anything, any clue. And then I saw it, an email from 5 years ago, shortly after my father passed away. It was from Tucker Davidson, our family lawyer, addressed to my father's personal email, but with a copy forwarded to me. The subject line read, "RE, final will and trust details." My father, bless his meticulous soul, had always been paranoid about digital backups. He'd insisted I keep copies of important documents, even voicemails, on a separate cloud drive he'd set up for me. It was a habit I'd mostly ignored, but now it was a lifeline. I remembered the password, a silly inside joke between us. I navigated to the cloud drive. It was a digital graveyard of old school projects, vacation photos, and then a folder labeled Dad's Files. Inside, amidst scanned documents and old tax returns, was an audio file. "Tucker Davidson, voicemail, 2018-09-15. I clicked play, the tinny sound filling the quiet library. "Lillian, this is Tucker. I've just finalized everything with your father's estate. As per his wishes, you are the primary beneficiary of the Sherman Family Trust, holding the majority of his liquid assets and the controlling interest in Sherman Holdings. Your brother, Hank, receives a smaller allocation and a minority interest. Your mother, Amelia, is provided for through a separate annuity and the family home, but the bulk of the business and financial control rests with you. Your father was very clear about his intentions, given your aptitude for business. I'll send over the full documentation tomorrow, but I wanted to give you a heads up. It's quite substantial. Congratulations, Lillian." The recording ended, leaving a ringing silence in my ears. Primary beneficiary, controlling interest, not Hank, not Amelia. Me. This wasn't about my mental health. This was about money. My father's money. And they had lied. They had lied to commit me, to get their hands on what was rightfully mine. The note from the patient, "Your family called this in 2 weeks before you snapped," echoed in my mind. It was all premeditated. My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. The cold fury that had been simmering since the note now roared into a bonfire. They had orchestrated this. Amelia, Hank, and who else? Tucker Davidson. He was the key. He'd been my father's most trusted advisor for decades. Why hadn't he helped me? Why hadn't he intervened? The voicemail was from 5 years ago. A lot could change. I pulled up his law firm's website. The page was blank. No, not blank. A single line of text. "This domain is no longer active." My heart sank. I quickly searched for his address, the one I remembered from my father's business cards. It was just a few blocks away. I had to see for myself. I walked, my legs stiff, my mind a whirlwind of betrayal and dawning realization. The building was old, brick, with a brass plaque that should have read Davidson and Associates. But the plaque was gone. In its place, a faded For Lease sign hung crookedly in the window, gathering dust. The office was empty, dark, a hollow shell. Tucker was gone, and something was very, very wrong. The For Lease sign mocked me. Tucker Davidson, the man who had been a rock for my father, the man who had confirmed I was the primary beneficiary of his trust, was gone. His office, a place that had felt as solid and dependable as a vault, was an empty shell. It was another piece of the puzzle, slotting into place with sickening precision. They weren't just trying to sideline me, they were erasing every trace of my father's true intentions. I went back to the library, my mind a storm of cold, calculated rage. My father had been a stickler for digital organization, and he'd insisted I set up a cloud drive years ago, a place where we could share documents, photos, and important files. It was an old service, one I rarely used, but I remembered the login. It was a simple password, one my whole family knew because my dad had a habit of using easy-to-remember phrases for shared accounts. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The drive loaded, a familiar interface from years ago. I navigated to the Family Archive folder, and there it was, a subfolder recently modified, labeled Lillian Health Records. My breath hitched. I clicked it open. Inside were scanned documents, official-looking forms, and psychiatric evaluations. They detailed a rapid decline in my mental state, symptoms of severe depression, paranoia, and erratic behavior. Dates were listed, some stretching back months, others just weeks before I was committed. None of it was true. I had never experienced any of those symptoms. What made my blood run cold was the small print at the bottom of one of the evaluations. A digital signature. Kendall Lee. My best friend. My best friend, 28 years old, who I'd known since kindergarten. She wasn't a doctor, wasn't a therapist, but her name was on a document used to declare me unstable. She hadn't just stood by, she had actively participated. She had signed her name to a lie that stole my life. I kept digging. In another folder, Property Inventory, I found spreadsheets, detailed lists of my belongings, my furniture, my electronics, even my clothes, each item meticulously catalogued with columns for condition and estimated value. The modification dates on these spreadsheets were chilling. Some were from 3 weeks before my forced commitment. Hank, 31, my brother, had created them. He wasn't just selling my car, he was liquidating my entire life, piece by piece, before I was even locked away. It was all premeditated, a cold, calculated heist, disguised as an intervention. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking, but not from fear, from a burning, unyielding resolve. They had played their parts. Amelia, Hank, Kendall. They had all played their parts in this twisted charade. I needed help. Real help. Someone who would believe me. I remembered Dr. Aurora Whitney, a psychiatrist I'd considered consulting a few years back for a general checkup, just to discuss stress management, but I'd never followed through. She had a reputation for being sharp, ethical, and thorough. She was 38, highly respected in her field. I found her clinic's website. There was an email address. I typed out a concise, factual email, stripping away all emotion. I explained who I was, what had happened, and that I had evidence of falsified medical records. I asked if she would be willing to assess me objectively, and if necessary, testify. I didn't expect a reply, not really, but I had to try. The library was closing. I needed a place to think, a place to be alone. My apartment was gone. My bank accounts were frozen. I rummaged through the small backpack I'd been given at the facility. Inside, tucked into a forgotten side pocket, was an old, crumpled $20 bill and a few fives. Not much, but enough for one night. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with flickering neon signs and a faint smell of stale cigarettes. The room was small, the bed lumpy, but it had a door that locked from the inside. I threw my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since waking up in that sterile room, I let go. The tears came, hot and stinging, a torrent of grief for the life I'd lost, for the family that had betrayed me, for the friend who had stabbed me in the back. I cried until my throat was raw, until my eyes were swollen shut, until there was nothing left but a hollow ache. Then, slowly, the emptiness began to fill, not with despair, but with a cold, clear resolve. I wasn't broken. I was just reset. They had taken everything, but they hadn't taken my mind. They hadn't taken my will. I pulled out a crumpled receipt from my pocket and a pen. On the back, I started to write a list. Names, dates, evidence. Every single detail I could remember. My father's will, Tucker's voicemail, Hank's inventory lists, Kendall's signature, Dr. Whitney. This wasn't just about getting my life back. This was about making them pay. Every single one of them. The next morning, I checked my old Gmail account from the motel's public computer. There was an unread email. The sender was an address I recognized, but hadn't seen in years. My cousin, Paisley Sherman, 26 years old. We hadn't spoken since my father's funeral, estranged by some old family drama I barely remembered. I clicked it open, my heart thudding. The subject line was just a single word. Your email. The message was short, blunt. I know what they did. I didn't think you'd fight back. I didn't think you'd fight back. Paisley's email was a jolt, a cold splash of water. It confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't just a family secret. It was an open one, at least to some. My estranged cousin, 26 years old, had seen through their charade. I replied immediately, keeping it brief and to the point. I am. I need your help. Her response came quickly. Meet me at the old coffee shop, downtown, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Don't tell anyone. The coffee shop was a relic, the kind of place my father used to frequent, filled with the scent of stale coffee and old books. Paisley was already there, tucked into a booth in the back, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, her eyes wary. She looked tired, younger than her 26 years, but there was a quiet strength about her. Lillian, she said, her voice low. I heard what happened. They said you had a breakdown. They lied, I stated, no emotion in my voice. They committed me to get their hands on Dad's trust. I have proof of falsified documents. I know Hank sold my car and emptied my apartment before I was even released. I know Kendall signed off on fake psych evaluations. Paisley winced at Kendall's name. Yeah, I figured. Amelia's been acting different. And Hank's been flashing money around. I knew something was off. They've been trying to get into Dad's old digital archives for months. They thought they were locked out. Digital archives? My ears perked up. What archives? Dad set up this crazy encrypted server, a personal cloud, years ago. He told me about it once, said it was for family legacy stuff. He gave me the access codes just in case, said it was for future generations if anything happened to him or you. I never looked at it much, but I saw Amelia and Hank trying to brute force their way in a few weeks ago. My father, ever the strategist, he'd always been one step ahead. Can you get me in? Paisley hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, it's on an old, secure network. I can give you remote access. It's not traceable back to me directly. But if they find out I helped you, I'm out of the family, too. I understand, I said, my gaze steady. I won't let them know. The next day, from the library, Paisley guided me through the complex login process. The encrypted family storage was a treasure trove. It held scanned copies of every legal document my father had ever signed, every financial statement, every single version of his will. And there it was, crystal clear, the original trust will, the one Amelia had sworn never existed, the one that named me Lillian Sherman as the primary beneficiary, with controlling interest in Sherman Holdings. My mother hadn't just lied about its existence, she had rewritten the narrative entirely. The document also detailed that Tucker Davidson was the sole executor and trustee, with strict instructions to ensure my father's wishes were carried out. This explained why Tucker had vanished. He hadn't been bribed. He'd been pressured, likely threatened, into quitting rather than tampering with the documents or going against my father's wishes. While I was sifting through the digital files, an email popped up. It was from Dr. Aurora Whitney. Lillian, I've reviewed your email. This sounds incredibly serious. I believe I can help. Please call my office to schedule an initial consultation. Relief washed over me, a rare warmth in the cold landscape of my revenge. I called her immediately. Dr. Whitney listened patiently, her voice calm and professional. I laid out everything, the forced commitment, the falsified records, the stolen assets, Tucker's voicemail, the original will. She asked precise, pointed questions. When I finished, she said, based on what you've described and the evidence you've provided, it's clear there's a significant legal and ethical breach here. I can conduct a full, independent psychiatric evaluation. If the prior diagnosis was indeed based on falsified information, I can testify to your mental competence and the fraudulent nature of their claims. She then advised me on the next step, filing a formal legal motion to reopen the trust's validity and demand a competency hearing. You'll need a lawyer, Lillian, a good one. I knew who I needed. Fabian Stone. He was a name synonymous with high-stakes corporate litigation, known for his ruthless efficiency and sharp legal mind. But he was expensive. I had no access to my funds. Then a memory surfaced. Years ago, my father, ever the futurist, had encouraged me to invest a small amount in a nascent cryptocurrency. I'd bought a few obscure coins, forgotten about them, and never checked the wallet again. It was a long shot, but I had nothing to lose. I found the old wallet key on a dusty hard drive I'd kept in a separate, secure location, away from my main computer. I accessed it from a burner laptop I bought with the last of my cash. The market had exploded. The small investment had grown exponentially. It wasn't enough to live on forever, but it was more than enough to pay Fabian Stone's retainer. I contacted his office. His assistant was initially dismissive, but when I mentioned the nature of the case, a fraudulent psychiatric commitment to seize a multi-million-dollar trust, with evidence of falsified medical records and a vanished family lawyer, she put me straight through. Fabian Stone, 46, had a voice like gravel, calm and authoritative. He listened without interruption as I laid out my case, detailing every piece of evidence. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Ms. Sherman," he finally said, "this is an extraordinary claim, but if even half of what you say is true, you have a very strong case." I sent him everything: the audio of Tucker's voicemail, the original will from Paisley's access, the forged medical records with Kendall's signature, Hank's inventory spreadsheets. He reviewed them quickly, his eyes scanning the documents with a predatory focus. He picked up one of the forged psychiatric files, the one with Kendall's name. His lips curled into a slow, chilling smile. He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming. "This," Fabian Stone muttered, his voice low and dangerous, "this is perjury, and we're going to bury them with it." Fabian's words, "We're going to bury them with it," echoed in my mind. The cold, hard reality of what was coming settled over me. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war. And I was ready for it. My first step, Fabian advised, was to gather more intel. "They're operating under the assumption you're still unstable, or at least contained," he'd said. "Use that. Let them think you're gone, then observe." I needed to see them, to gauge their confidence, to look them in the eye without them knowing I was there. I found out through a quick online search that my mother, Amelia, and Hank were hosting a public fundraiser for a local charity. It was exactly the kind of event they'd use to polish their image, to present themselves as pillars of the community, especially now that they were flush with my father's money. I spent the better part of a day preparing. I dyed my hair a darker shade, bought a cheap wig, and found some oversized glasses. I chose a simple, unremarkable dress from a thrift store, something that would help me blend into the background. I was 29, but with the right makeup and a slightly hunched posture, I could pass for someone older, someone forgettable. The fundraiser was held at a swanky downtown hotel ballroom. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and cheap ambition. I slipped in, a ghost in the crowd, my heart thudding a steady rhythm of anticipation. There they were. Amelia, 54, in a shimmering gown, her smile wide and practiced, accepting accolades. Hank, 31, beside her, looking smug in a tailored suit, shaking hands and laughing too loudly. And then I saw her. Kendall Lee, 28, my former best friend, draped over Hank's arm, looking far too comfortable, far too much like she belonged. She was wearing a dress that looked suspiciously like one of mine that had gone missing from my apartment. The sight of her, so casually integrated into their scheme, sent a fresh wave of ice through me. I moved through the crowd, a silent observer. I had a small, discreet camera in my purse, and I snapped photos. Amelia accepting a large check, Hank schmoozing with a local councilman, Kendall laughing, her head thrown back. I also had a voice recorder, set to pick up snippets of conversation. I managed to get close enough to hear fragments. "Such a difficult time with Lillian," Amelia murmured to a sympathetic-looking woman, her voice dripping with feigned sorrow. "We're just so relieved she's getting the help she needs." Hank, meanwhile, was boasting about a new investment opportunity for Sherman Holdings, using language that sounded suspiciously like my father's business plans. He was a terrible mimic. Then, Kendall. She'd had too much champagne. I saw her cornered by a woman who asked, "How's Lillian doing? I heard she was unwell." Kendall giggled, swaying slightly. "Oh, Lillian. Yeah, she was really spiraling. We had to do something. Hank and Amelia, they just wanted to shut her up. You know? Before she ruined the family image. It was getting messy. She slurred the last words, but the meaning was crystal clear. Shut her up. Not help her. Not save her. Shut her up. I recorded it all. Every damning word. The recording was grainy, but her voice was unmistakable. Over the next few days, Fabian and I discussed our strategy. He advised against a full public disclosure, yet, preferring to apply pressure subtly. We want them to sweat, to make mistakes, he explained. A slow burn before the explosion. I started leaking small, anonymous details to local media outlets, tips about unexplained wealth in the Sherman family, sudden changes in trust management, and a prominent lawyer's mysterious disappearance. Nothing directly linking to me, just enough to plant seeds of doubt to make reporters start digging. It was like dropping pebbles into a still pond, watching the ripples spread. Meanwhile, Dr. Aurora Whitney was working diligently on her independent assessment. She was thorough, meticulous. We met several times, and she ran a battery of tests, asked probing questions about my history, my relationships, my emotional state. She reviewed the forged documents I'd provided, comparing them to my actual behavior and medical history. A week after the fundraiser, Dr. Whitney called me. Lillian, I found significant inconsistencies in the timeline of your so-called mental health crisis. The symptoms described in those falsified reports, rapid onset paranoia, severe disassociation, don't align with your medical history or your current presentation. More importantly, the crisis was supposedly escalating right around the time your family was making these financial and property arrangements. It's a classic pattern of manufactured illness for gain. She confirmed what I already knew, but hearing it from a professional, a respected psychiatrist, was validating. It solidified our case. The ripples I'd created in the media started to bear fruit. A small article appeared in a local business paper, questioning the sudden shift in Sherman Holdings management. Another online blog hinted at internal family disputes. It was minor, but it was a start. Then, the email arrived. It wasn't from a reporter. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, one known for its aggressive tactics. The subject line was stark. Cease and desist. Sherman Family Matters. The body of the email was a legal threat, a subpoena to gag me from discussing confidential family matters in public. It was signed by a senior partner at the firm, representing Amelia and Hank Sherman. They knew I was out. They knew I was fighting back, and they were trying to silence me. It was a legal ambush. But it wasn't a surprise. It was exactly what Fabian had predicted. They were reacting, and that meant my plan was working. The legal threat from Amelia and Hank's lawyers was a declaration of war. Fabian Stone, however, just smiled. Good, he said, leaning back in his chair. They're rattled. This means they're worried about what you know. It also means we're close to depositions. Over the next few weeks, my life became a blur of legal preparation. Fabian, 46, was relentless. He coached me through mock depositions, grilling me with questions, pushing me to remain calm, factual, and unwavering. They will try to bait you, Lillian, he warned. They will try to make you seem emotional, unstable. Don't give them an inch. Stick to the facts. Let the evidence speak. I spent hours with Dr. Aurora Whitney, 38, going over her findings. She was preparing a comprehensive report, detailing the inconsistencies in the falsified psychiatric evaluations and providing her expert opinion on my mental competence. Her calm, professional demeanour was a stark contrast to the chaos my family had created. Then, a call came from an anonymous number. I hesitated, but Fabian had told me to answer any unknown calls. "Hello? Lillian, is that you?" The voice was raspy, cautious. "It's Tucker Davidson." My heart leapt. "Tucker? Where are you? Are you okay?" "I've been in hiding," he said, his voice low. "After your father passed, Amelia and Hank came at me hard. They wanted me to reinterpret the will, to change the beneficiaries. I refused. Your father was very specific about you being in charge. They threatened me, my family, said they'd ruin my career, my life. I couldn't risk it. I just disappeared. I couldn't tamper with your father's wishes, but I couldn't fight them alone either. I heard about your situation. I'm sorry, Lillian. I truly am." "Can you testify?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "Can you tell the court what happened?" There was a long pause. "Yes," he finally said, his voice firmer. "I can. I have copies of the original will, the one they tried to suppress. I have notes from my meetings with your father. I can confirm everything." It was a massive breakthrough. Tucker, 45, was a credible witness, a pillar of the legal community before he vanished. His testimony would be devastating. I immediately connected him with Fabian. Meanwhile, Paisley, 26, was proving to be an invaluable ally. She was a whiz with data. "Lillian," she called me one evening, her voice hushed. "You won't believe what I found. I've been digging through Amelia's personal accounts, the ones she thought were hidden. She's been funneling money from the trust." "How much?" I asked, my voice flat. "Nearly $300,000, Paisley whispered, "into shell charities. Charities she oversees. It looks like she's been siphoning off funds for her own use, disguised as donations. Embezzlement. Fraud." The layers of their deception were peeling back, each one uglier than the last. This wasn't just about my inheritance, it was about outright criminal activity. Fabian decided it was time to make a move. The gag order was a clear attempt to silence me. We would use it against them. "We're going to release a public statement," he announced. "Not a leak, Lillian. A full, official statement from you as the sole surviving heir, with legal medical documentation of your complete mental competence. We'll preempt their narrative." It was a risky move, but I agreed without hesitation. I was done being a ghost. I was done being silent. I was done letting them control the narrative. Fabian drafted the statement. It was concise, powerful, and backed by Dr. Whitney's official report. It detailed my forced commitment, the fraudulent claims, the theft of my assets, and my intention to reclaim my father's legacy and expose the truth. We released it to all major news outlets, along with Dr. Whitney's assessment. The media exploded. My story, once a whisper, was now a roar. The headlines screamed, "Heiress claims family fraudulently committed her to seize fortune. Sherman Family Trust at center of legal battle." Within hours, the response came. Not from their lawyers, but directly from Amelia Sherman, 54, through a carefully worded press release. Her statement was eerily calm, almost maternal, designed to evoke sympathy and paint me as the troubled daughter. "My daughter, Lillian, has always had episodes," Amelia's statement read, her voice on the accompanying audio clip sounding gentle, concerned. "We've tried for years to get her the help she needs. This is a very difficult time for our family, and we pray for her recovery and stability. We only ever acted out of love and concern." It was a masterpiece of gaslighting, a public performance of the role she'd been playing for months. But I knew the truth, and soon the world would too. The hearing was set, the stage was ready, the courtroom was a blur of dark suits, hushed whispers, and the low hum of air conditioning. I walked in, flanked by Fabian Stone, 46, and Dr. Aurora Whitney, 38, a quiet storm brewing inside me. My heart was a steady drumbeat, not of fear, but of anticipation. This was it, the day everything changed. Amelia, 54, Hank, 31, and Kendall, 28, were already seated at the defense table, their faces a mixture of apprehension and forced composure. Amelia's perfectly coiffed hair and tailored suit couldn't hide the faint tremor in her hands. Hank, usually so smug, looked pale, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Kendall, beside him, avoided my gaze, her face a mask of carefully constructed indifference. Only Hank managed a weak, defiant smirk in my direction, but it faltered when his eyes met Fabian's. Fabian began with the opening statement, his voice calm, methodical, laying out the timeline of deception. He painted a picture not of a concerned family, but of a calculated conspiracy. He spoke of my father's original will, the one naming me, Lillian Sherman, 29, as the primary beneficiary. He then presented the first piece of damning evidence, Tucker Davidson's voicemail, played for the entire court, confirming my father's true intentions. Tucker, 45, then took the stand. He looked drawn, but his testimony was clear and unwavering. He recounted how Amelia and Hank had pressured him, threatened him, trying to force him to alter the will. He explained why he had vanished, choosing to protect his family rather than betray my father's trust. His words hung heavy in the air, dismantling Amelia's concerned mother narrative with every sentence. Next, Fabian brought out the falsified psychiatric evaluations. He projected them onto a large screen, highlighting Kendall Lee's digital signature. Kendall visibly flinched. Fabian then called Dr. Aurora Whitney to the stand. Dr. Whitney, calm and composed, explained her independent assessment. She detailed how the diagnosis used to commit me was based entirely on falsified behavioral statements, none of which aligned with my actual medical history or her thorough evaluation. She meticulously dissected the fraudulent reports, pointing out medical inaccuracies and procedural irregularities that proved they were fabricated. "In your professional opinion, Dr. Whitney," Fabian asked, "was Lillian Sherman suffering from a mental health crisis that warranted involuntary commitment at the time she was admitted to the facility?" "Absolutely not," Dr. Whitney stated, her voice clear and firm. "Based on my comprehensive evaluation and review of all available evidence, Ms. Sherman was, and is, mentally competent. The diagnosis used to commit her was without medical basis, and appears to have been manufactured." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. Amelia's face was ashen. Hank's jaw was clenched. Kendall had her head down. Fabian then turned to the financial fraud. He presented Paisley's findings, detailing how Amelia had funneled nearly $300,000 from the trust into shell charities she controlled. He showed the court the digital paper trail, the dates of the transfers, the names of the charities that were little more than fronts. This was not an act of concern for a troubled daughter, Fabian declared, his voice rising, but a calculated scheme to seize control of an inheritance and defraud a trust. He then called me to the stand. I walked past Amelia, Hank, and Kendall, my gaze steady, meeting their eyes for the first time without flinching. I answered Fabian's questions calmly, factually, recounting the emptiness of my apartment, the frozen bank accounts, the sale of my car, the note from the fellow patient. I spoke of the feeling of betrayal, the systematic dismantling of my life. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show emotion. I just stated the facts. Then Fabian played the recording from the fundraiser. Kendall's drunken admission. Shut her up, you know, before she ruined the family image. It was getting messy. The audio was a little muffled, but the words were clear enough. Kendall's face went white. Hank slammed his fist on the table. Finally, Fabian played the last piece of evidence. An audio clip I'd found on my father's old digital recorder, a device he used to dictate notes. It was a faint, almost inaudible whisper, but it was Amelia's voice. She must have forgotten it was recording. The courtroom fell silent as the recording played, the sound amplified through the speakers. It was Amelia, her voice low and venomous, talking to Hank. She was never going to let us touch that money, Amelia whispered, her voice laced with bitterness. She was too much like her father. Too careful. This was the only way. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Amelia's face crumpled. Hank looked like he'd been punched. Kendall stared, horrified. The judge, a stern woman who had maintained a stoic expression throughout the proceedings, looked from the defense table to me, then back to the evidence. She cleared her throat. Given the overwhelming evidence presented, the judge stated, her voice ringing with authority, including the testimony of Mr. Davidson, the expert psychiatric assessment of Dr. Whitney, the documented financial fraud, and the compelling audio evidence, this court finds in favor of Ms. Lillian Sherman. A wave of relief, cold and sharp, washed over me. It was done. The Sherman Family Trust is hereby reinstated under the terms of the original will. The judge continued. Ms. Sherman's mental competence is fully affirmed. Furthermore, this court recommends a full criminal investigation into the fraudulent activities and conspiracy to commit Ms. Sherman. Hank, who had been simmering with rage, suddenly exploded. You betch! He roared, lunging over the defense table towards me, his face contorted with fury. Bailiffs immediately moved, grabbing him, pulling him back as he thrashed and cursed. Amelia sat frozen, watching her son being restrained, her own carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The bailiffs had Hank, 31, pinned against the table, his face purple with rage, still screaming obscenities. Amelia, 54, sat motionless, her eyes fixed on her son, a silent, hollow defeat etched onto her face. Kendall, 28, had already slipped out, a ghost vanishing from the courtroom, her betrayal now exposed for the world to see. I watched them, a strange mix of satisfaction and emptiness swirling inside me. It was over. The judge's gavel had fallen, sealing their fate. Fabian, 46, put a hand on my arm. Let's go, Lillian. We have a press conference to prepare for. Outside the courthouse, a throng of reporters and cameras awaited. The news had spread like wildfire. Amelia's carefully constructed image, Hank's swagger, Kendall's quiet complicity, all shattered. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind. Amelia Sherman was officially placed under investigation for financial fraud, with the evidence Paisley, 26, had uncovered leading the charge. Hank Sherman was not only charged with fraud related to the trust, but also with assault for his outburst in the courtroom. It was a swift, public downfall. Kendall Lee, as expected, was nowhere to be found. News reports hinted she had fled the state, likely to avoid facing charges for her role in forging the psychiatric documents. She was gone, vanished like a bad dream. I stood before the cameras, the bright lights blinding me, but my voice was steady. "My name is Lillian Sherman," I began, looking directly into the lenses. "For the past few months, my mother and brother conspired to have me falsely committed to a psychiatric facility, fabricating a mental illness in order to seize control of my late father's trust and assets. They emptied my apartment, froze my accounts, and sold my car, all while I was held against my will." I laid out the facts, concisely, calmly. Tucker Davidson's testimony, Dr. Aurora Whitney's, 38, expert assessment, Paisley's financial discoveries, Kendall's forged signature, and Amelia's whispered confession. I didn't need to add emotion. The facts spoke for themselves. Today, the court has ruled in my favor, affirming my mental competence and reinstating my father's will. This was not about my mental health. This was about greed, betrayal, and a calculated attempt to steal a legacy. I ended by stating my intention to cooperate fully with the authorities in their criminal investigations. The narrative was mine again. Not Amelia's carefully crafted lie, but the cold, hard truth. In the days that followed, the legal machinery moved quickly. I regained full access to the Sherman family trust. The accounts, once frozen, were now mine. The controlling interest in Sherman Holdings, my father's life's work, was back in my hands. I used a portion of the recovered funds to establish a significant donation to a national mental health advocacy group. Not out of kindness, not out of altruism, but out of a cold, calculated mockery of their justification. They had used mental health as a weapon to imprison me. I would use it to highlight their deceit. It was a public statement, a final, cutting insult. The rest of the trust, the vast majority of it, I restructured, ensuring its security and my control. The financial victory was absolute, but the emotional landscape was a wasteland. My family was gone. Amelia, facing serious charges, was no longer a mother, but an adversary. Hank, facing prison, was no longer a brother, but a criminal. Kendall, a fugitive, was no longer a friend, but a betrayer. Paisley, 26, was still there. She called me a few days after the ruling. "Lillian," she said, her voice soft. "I'm glad you won." "I really am." "Thank you, Paisley," I replied. "I couldn't have done it without you." We met for coffee, not at the old shop, but a new, neutral place. She was still my cousin, still the one person who had believed me and helped me. But the easy trust, the familial bond, was broken, scarred. We talked about the future, about what she would do, about what I would do. There was a quiet understanding between us, a shared knowledge of the darkness we had witnessed. But the warmth of family, the kind I'd once taken for granted, was gone. It was just us, two survivors of a war that had torn our family apart. I looked at the empty seat beside me, the ghost of a family that once was. I had won. I had everything back, and more. But the cost had been everything else. I didn't come back for healing. I came back to make sure no one survived the fire they started. I did, and that's enough.